Yep, we can see. Go ahead.
All right, sounds good. Well, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to everybody. It looks like everybody's still all around the world, no changes there. Um, I'm going to talk about some announcements first, the current status and changes as far as the program, a review of the purpose, and a high level review of the tech and what we need help with. I'm not going to be doing a deep dive. We're kind of in a transitionary period right now, where we've just completed the MVP and we're moving on to the next components. There's not a lot to talk about tech wise at the moment. So first off, on the announcement side, my last day at Cyber is Friday. I will assume all of your microphones were off and you all went, "Oh man, that's a bummer." I'm going to still be working in the space. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation created the Fraud Risk Management Center of Excellence. We had to give it a name, and that's what we've got so far. So it is a center of excellence, with one of the assets being the fraud risk management product, or the transactional monitoring system. I am going to be the executive director of this center of excellence, and no, I was not poached. Everybody's still very happy with what's going on. I still plan to be involved with the Mojaloop community and really want to be involved in the CBDC Center of Excellence, as well, as I think there is some commingling of interests there. So the Cybern team that will be replacing me, and I'll do the next TGB meeting with Roland, and do a changeover and an introduction. It's not like I'm going anywhere or running away. So Roland, who is the CTO at Cybern, will take my place in the TGB. Jason Darmanovich has had and has been running. He's been the BU head for the open source initiatives, which also includes Mojaloop and the fraud risk management section. Johannes Foley is currently a DA member, product manager, Mojaloop, fraud and risk. And then from a business perspective, Salvatore Herrera, who is the BU head of innovations and product, he focuses mainly on the biometrics and the onboarding areas. So a lot of our AI components are under him. He will be taking the business side of Actio, or the FRMS. So basically, a lot of what we're going to do is share what's complete. That the new Center of Excellence, what it's going to look like or possibly look like, since it's brand new, we really don't know. The fact that the PPA adapter is in fact being built for Mojaloop, so connectivity with that's going on, and Foley is handling the interaction with everybody over there. Then from the rest of the deck, kind of the flow that I'm going to go through is take you through a use case that we were designed to cover. Basically, how that's a pattern or becomes a typology. How do we create typologies? How the process works in general. How it works within the greater context of a DFSP and a switch, Mojaloop. What makes us unique as far as what we're doing, and then the Center of Excellence itself. So we've got a group of users that perform actions. In this case, we've got Adamu Bingwa, Cheji. We're convinced by Etana here that they won a prize and they needed to pay a small administration fee to Etana to process their winnings. So a classic scam type of scenario. They each transfer the money to Etana's account. As the payment arrives, Etana immediately cashes out the payment. Adamu's payment arrives after the money agent is closed for the day, and Etana quickly transfers the money to Dume. And the very first thing in the morning he does is cash out. So kind of suspicious if you look at it, but Adamu, Bingwei, and Cheji may not realize anything yet at this point. So does this show the pattern of a fraud? We're still very particular about showing our typologies, the details of our typologies, but basically this falls under scams or our typology 28. And I'll go into this into more detail, but it hits a couple of areas and a couple of flags and is in fact a fraud. So let me change the pointer. So what we've got is this new creditor transfer rule, right? So basically all these people created a new creditor. So that should be a flag, or a type of a potential flag, and that person is Etana. Are outgoing transfers similar, right? Yes, in fact they are. They all won a prize, and there's a fee, so they're exactly the same. Is there increased account activity that goes on with the creditor, so with Etana? Yes, there's an increased amount of activity. Are there a large number of similar transaction amounts with the creditor? Yes, they're all sending the exact same thing to Etana. Is Etana aggregating payments coming from other people and doing transaction mirroring? Yes, that's exactly what's going on. And then is there immediate transaction mirroring, in this case, cashing out or doing a transfer to Dume? So the reality is this is a fraud. This falls under the false promotions, phishing, social engineering, basically scams category of things. So this is what we were intending to catch. This pattern is called a typology. And so what we have next is how do we define a typology to the system? First, we have to develop all the individual rules, those rules that I just walked through. There's actually all these rules here. Those just happen to be the ones that got caught. And then we compose them into the form of a typology. So how does the pattern look? What are the limits? Things along those lines. And after that, we have to have a mechanism to deploy that typology, and we deploy it to the system. Once it's in the system, though, that's not enough. We also have to be able to calibrate it, because in one vendor, it may be that three people sending money to somebody counts as a fraud, and another one it may be two, things along those lines. So everything needs to be individually calibrated once it's put in place, and that also needs to occur for the typology and the rules. So from there, we have this thing called the network map. And I believe we've talked about this before, but if you recall, all those transactions were done domestically. None of them were cross-border, none of them were Forex. So we take a look at basically what typologies need to run against a transaction. And that is part of what this network map does. So there's no Forex involved. So we can immediately rule out the fact that we need to run any typologies for Forex. And so we can drop those out of the mix, all right? Reducing the amount of work that we have to do, increasing the speed and performance of the system. From here, the network map also lists all the rules that are going to be run for all the typologies, and has a process in it for deduping the rules. So we also drop duplicate rules, and therefore we're going to run the system very efficiently. So we're going to run only the typologies that are needed for a given transaction, and only the rules that are needed. We're going to run them once and use them for all typologies. So what does the process flow look like in general? The process flow basically starts, we call this a PPA or payment adapter, but the reality is it's any sort of a channel, and I'll explain that in a minute. So I've simplified this a little bit from the technical depth before. Basically, the payment platform adapter is an adapter that connects to the system that so that we know how to gather all the information that we need from the system. From there, we have the transactional monitoring system API that actually works through the API or through the PPA and monitors all the transactions that come in. From there, we have data prep is continuously going on. So data prep is going on before, during a transaction. We're going to set things up, and after a transaction, etc. There's a lot of different processes that need to occur on the data side. At the CRISP level, the channel level, we're going to start to run that data map. We're going to determine the appropriate typologies. We're going to determine the rules, and we're going to route them to where they need to go. Basically, you can think of this as a big old bucket of rules that need to be run, but they're run within the given channel, and a given channel has different performance indicators. So like interdictive rules that need to run immediately and stop a payment would have a channel by itself that it's run in that fashion, and its rules would be run within that channel. We're going to then aggregate all the results and score the individual typologies. And if there is something that requires us to do an interdiction or a stop transaction, we're going to create an investigation alert at this point in time. At that point, we're going to take a look at the channel, and we're going to aggregate all the typologies into a given channel. We may have typologies that the score didn't indicate a flag at the transaction processor level, but at the channel level, when combined, they may actually cause a flag. So there's lots of reasons to pull that together at that point. And then we're going to take the individual channels, and we're going to pull them together to the transaction aggregation. And we're going to create investigation alerts, write the transaction results, etc. And we write that out through an API that is the CMS API that outputs the results. And basically, it's the end of the process. One of the things that we designed this for, though, was to be generic. So we can take this PPA and we can turn that into just about anything. We could make that a processing adapter for insurance, for cyber, for lots of different types of systems. The TMS API is mostly going to remain the same. We may have to adjust that for different data types, and the data prep is changed always. For every customer, that's going to be an adjustment. Just because someone is using, let's say, Flex for a core banking system doesn't mean they're using it the same way. Doesn't mean they have things that are going to flag in the same manner. So there's always going to be a major adjustments to the data prep layer. Then we're going to do an adjustment to the network maps and the rules. And then inside the rules itself, we can actually, these rules can be algorithmic as they're intended to be right now, or AI based. But everything that happens from that point on is basically pretty, the same. We may need to continue some data through or something along those lines, but basically the process remains unchanged. So we've got a pretty good pipeline for processing. We went with the semi-attached model. If you guys recall from times gone back when the Deloitte work, Justice was doing a lot of this work. We went with the semi-attached model. And one of the main reasons is that the DFSP, the financial service provider, is the obligatory. They're obligated to the regulator, not the payment switch. The payment switch may be obligated in different ways, but they're not the ultimate party that's responsible for letting a transaction onto the system. So by being semi-attached, we have a separate system that runs in conjunction with the hub. And basically, you have these adapters that run at each of the DFSPs, or perhaps maybe they run an entire system even. So we can go straight through, or we can go through a PPA adapter and direct to our system. We can also have them go straight through to the switch, and the switch runs an adapter. So either type of location, it can be set up to handle both so that there can be a mixed match of options. All these transactional data is the FRML, the fraud data and the AML data that comes out are going to be routed back to the CMS system. And they're going to get all that information back so they can interact with the regulators as well as they get their alerts and things like that. The output is really generic. It's one JSON file, and then there are various alerts that can be triggered as well to alert a different system or to do interdictive stop. So that's kind of how it runs and how it fits into the system and goes to the regulator at the end. So what's more important to talk about is why did we do this? why an open source fraud risk management system. I love this quote. I found this a little while ago, and I've been reusing it over and over again. With 4.5 billion people online, more than half of humanity is at risk of falling victim to cybercrime at any time, requiring a unified and strong response. That's from Jürgen Stock, who at the time was the Interpol Secretary General. I'm not sure if he still is. But we can see that fraud is a major issue, and it's getting worse. It's expensive. It's expensive to those who are defrauded, especially the those at the lower end of the totem pole, if you will. It's expensive to the system. It costs a lot of money to the system in losses, and it costs a lot of money in the systems that are needed, both for responding with the regulators and in actually catching the fraud and reducing the fraud. And it's expensive to the government for dealing with their own fraud and helping others to defend against it. So there's a human impact, government outcomes impact, reputational, government systems impact, an industry impact, environmental, security, financial, and business impact. The reality is this impacts a lot of stuff. It's just huge. Based on international estimates, it was determined that the public bodies, so any given government, loses between 0.5 to 5% of their spend to fraud. Those are big numbers. The private sector is a lot harder to come up with because they fear this impact of reputational damage. But Merchant Savvy has determined that global losses of payment fraud have tripled to 32.39 billion in 2020, and going to 2027 is expected to hit the 40 billion mark, a little over half of that, or a raise of 25% during that time frame. I wouldn't doubt that that's going up, but this is the most recent number that I could find. So there's a huge increase in fraud that's happening, and we need to get some control over it. So why did we start with a transactional monitoring system? Because typically it's the most complex component of a fraud risk management system. Typically it's the hardest component of to implement of fraud risk management system, and typically it's the most expensive component of a fraud risk management system. Basically, it also has the most room for improvement. And what I mean by that is, if you're a very large bank, you can afford the best of systems. You've probably got a lot of custom stuff in place too, for that matter. If you're on the smaller side, if you're a microfinance or a smaller bank, you're making difficult decisions with budget, and you're probably doing just what you have to, or you're doing absolutely nothing at all. So within an organization, it is the place that we can see the most room for improvement in a fraud system. They will be doing basic KYC, know your customer and things along those lines, because it's heavily regulated. But actually catching the fraud, it's regulated, but not quite so much. And it's something that's being working on. We did have a goal to make a system that both scales up and scales down and solves more than one problem. So be it payment, cyber, or internal fraud. And we've succeeded with that. But the biggest thing that, as far as why, basically, hopefully you got out of that, it's hard. So I went ahead and I ripped off John F. Kennedy here. And when he was talking about, going to the moon, he says, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and to do the other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard, etc., and because we can do it, basically. So replace that go to the moon with build a TMS, because we can do it. And because we can solve, in particular, this gap right here, those people that are underserved and not covered at all, we can take care of. And we can reduce the costs in the system by providing something that normally is very complex, normally is very expensive, and things like that. So that's why we chose to focus on this. So some of the unique features, it's an engine only. You guys probably know that, but maybe some of the folks on here are new. It is API driven, highly configurable. So it is an engine, it's an API driven engine, but it's configurable by JSON message. So there is no UX for this. The UX is assumed, just like with Moduloop, that somebody's going to develop that. It's really modular and adaptive driven, both inbound and outbound. It scales up to run the largest of enterprises. So it's designed to massively scale out and literally do tens of thousands of transactions. But it's also designed to run on, let's say, a laptop. So how do we get something to the smallest of organizations where we're not trying to run more than 3,000 transactions a second and 35 milliseconds for transaction resolution? These people are operating in minutes, perhaps. So it needed to both scale up and scale down, which is interesting because scaling up in and of itself is hard to design a system that does that, and scaling down is hard to design a system that does that. Designing a system that does both is very hard, and that is what we chose to do. We pseudo-anonymize the data. Basically, what that means is all data coming in, all logging data is pseudo-anonymized, and to get rid of the PII information, the personally identifiable information. This is not GDPR ready or ready for systems because we don't have functionalities like take somebody out of a system, give them their data back, all the other things that a program like that requires. But it does protect all of the information within the system. So the most important step is done, and we leave the rest to the implementer. It's got this unique channel-driven design. So I mentioned interdicting. So we may need to stop a transaction actually, before it completes. We can have a channel just for that. A channel for immediate, that runs in milliseconds or runs in seconds. Near real time, if you will, that runs, in a few more seconds. Or in minutes even, and batch typologies, so things that are run daily, nightly, etc. So we can have a channel for each one of those. We can tune that channel, from a performance perspective and a consumption of resources perspective. So each channel can be tuned, by itself. Again, we have that concept of the network map per payment or transaction, and it determines the typologies to be run for the transaction and then the rules, and so those are run exactly only once. It's a very efficient use of the system. Like I said, the whole thing is configuration based, so these are the items that can be configured. The channel routing and setup processor, which is that CRSP, that CRISP component. This is where we decide what's going to happen with the network map. Individual rule processors can be set up and configured. The typology processors, so what are the typology expressions, the scoring, things like that, all the different parameters. The channel aggregation decisioning processor, so from the channel perspective, and then at the completion, the actual transaction itself. That's kind of a high-level overview of what we built and where we are, right now. Where we're going is this FRMS Center of Excellence, which is barely a thing. So we have an idea of where we want to go with it. It's being shaped and built as we speak. I would expect that, although I put it into Veer, it's moving along pretty fast, but there may be elements that aren't done until the end of the year. But the main and first job of this is how do we get engagements for the open source transactional monitoring system? How do we advance the cause? How do we get people using the MVP? Access is coming. We have now set up a neutral for the Center of Excellence location, and that, to be honest, the GitHub will probably be at this location before probably the end of the week, and the documentation will all be moved and ported shortly. Johannes Foley is handling all that. He does have an email address that is just at frms.io. Please, if you will, if you want to get access or you want to know how to implement, you want to know how to run the CI/CD, contact Foley, but please contact him through here so his work address doesn't get clogged up. I would expect that if you want to have a system and check it out from a CIDC standpoint, actually be running things, that would be in place by the end of August. Typologies are managed separately. As I said, so far we're still taking a protective viewpoint, and we haven't quite figured out how we're going to deal with that. We created the Center of Excellence. Basically, in the long run, it will cover all these different things. But as of right now, it is only the transactional monitoring and the process for that. So the process meaning that we can add, say, cybercrime and things like that into the mix. The processing pipeline exists. As well as the typologies. Lextigo going forward will be managing all of this, and the apricot model for calculating the scoring exists. We hope to have consulting, but the consulting will be in the form of pre-project planning, RFP support, funding support, and from a project management perspective, it'll be best practices and like a list of resources. From a knowledge portal, it'll be basically what we see in Mojaloop, the case studies, guidance, training materials, reference materials, things of that nature. Basically, what we've got is from a customer standpoint, we can service all of these types of organizations with minimal changes to the system. But someone needs to focus on these. So that is an opportunity, a business opportunity for an organization. From system integration standpoint, we have kind of the maintainers branch, which at the moment is mainly Cyber and Lextego. We have the consultants branch, which I have indications from Deloitte and BDO that they'll continue with doing advisory work and the general risk management or regulatory advice to an organization. Then on the FRMS side, we basically have the pure open source component, and we have people that are going to do their own branding. Cybern at the moment is the only one who stood up and said that they're going to do their own branding. It may be that we have switch operators that do their branding, switch providers that do their branding, people that provide core banking systems that do their own branded version. Basically, this is intended to be OEM'd inside another system, cyber, etc. Although we don't have anybody that's raised their hand to operate an official enterprise version, I'm hoping that I can convince Cybern to do so. So what do we need? We need SMEs, subject matter experts. We need these advisory consultants to step up. We need the customers to test. How do we actually put this on site, use their data, their systems, and make it run? We need the system integrators to sign up, customers for the engagements as a whole, and then the OEMs to sign up. So that's where we're going with that. And I'll leave you with the contacts on who to contact as far as what's going on from a cyber perspective and how to contact me going forward. And that is what I have.
Excellent, Greg. We've got 2 minutes left on the clock. I want to see if there's any reactions from anyone. Any questions or stuff in the chat?
I have a burning question,
Yes.
Greg.
Yeah.
Tom here. So what about anti-slavery and anti-sex child trafficking, online sexual exploitation of children? Any sort of platform or and particularly payment platforms. And we've had a big one here with one of our banks in Australia where they were actually enabling it, and they got caught from something called AUSTRAC, which is there, as the Centre of Excellence, is there been any thought or any thought whatsoever of trying to track and prevent the Mojaloop systems and these financial payments platforms from detecting and becoming hubs and tools?
Yeah. Well, I tell you, Tom, there's a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot of, there's at least two. I wasn't familiar with AUSTRAC, but there are two organizations that specialize in this that are pretty good. But, all this for us, this would just be a change in typologies and rules and then configuring it up. And we could go after that type of information as well. To be honest, I don't know the full scope of what the Center of Excellence will cover. Matt and I are still working on that. We have a meeting tomorrow with a group of very interested people that have been part of another well, you talked to Charity during the last meeting. She runs the collaborative fraud program. We'll be talking to them tomorrow, and then there are various other organizations that have expressed interest as well. So yes, it can handle things like that because to the system, it's just a matter of creating the rule, creating the typology, how we would that up, and then how we have the adapter to the individual systems. So it's kind of the benefit of how we designed this is we can adjust it. An organization can decide to go after something like that. That's the space they want to specialize in, and then we can support them. So we could support them with how to make an adapter to change to the front end, how to they would have to adjust it to deal with the data, how to make the individual rules, and how to make the typologies. So we won't, in general, be making those ourselves, but we'd be supporting somebody else doing that, or maybe doing a white paper on how to implement something like that.
Yeah. So, and Tom, this is Matt. There are a lot of sort of unimplemented typologies in our grid, if you will, and in our backlog. If you wanted to help us to produce a typology on that, or sort of help us find like the one from OSTRAC or others, we would love to sort of get that into the list.
Yeah, I don't have the expertise, but I work with people who do. So it'd be good to explore this a little bit more. It's great to know that that's at least been in your thinking. Let me just advocate for it a little bit if I can, because it's growing, and the law enforcement folks I work with, I mean, it's right throughout Southeast Asia, and it's pretty bad. But there's organized forces trying to actually now exploit Africa, and that's actually started happening. I've been starting to see some arrests and some papers on that as well. So it's Africa sadly is a frontier, particularly for OSEC, online sexual exploitation of children. So anyway, that's my advocacy for the topic. I'm so glad you've been thinking of it. I just want to recommend it and importance to you.
Yeah, so Tom, just to let you know, in the list of typologies, there are 232 right now. The wildlife ones, as they relate to anti-money laundering, already exist, for example. So we do have typologies that are that. So I don't recall any off the top that deal with that, but that's definitely something to take a look at. Yeah, would appreciate your help with that.
Excellent. I'm just waiting to see if there's any final comments. If not, Greg, do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, that's really what I had right now. Friday is my last day, but not my last day for working with Mojaloop. I've already talked with Simeon, and Paula was sick when I called her still. But I want to stay involved. I believe in in these processes, and actually, I'm really excited that I kind of jumped from the commercial to the philanthropic or the NGO side of things, and I don't have to worry about the profit side quite so much. I just have to make sure that it's worth the spend, or Matt will be mad at me. So that's it. It's a different thing for me. But that's it. That's what I've got.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Greg.